Good day, and welcome back to another exciting crime time with Mike. Here we are heading into the topic of the Greyhound Bus Beheading. So, without further ado, let's jump right into the past to 2008. On a quiet summer night in 2008, a Greyhound bus rolled through the flat, endless prairies of Manitoba, carrying passengers who thought it was just another ordinary ride. The hum of the engine was steady, the kind of sound that lulled weary travelers into half-sleep. Some passengers had headphones in, some dozed against the windows, while others simply stared into the dark horizon. Among them was 22-year-old Tim McLean, a young man returning home from work at a carnival. He had found a seat near the back, leaning comfortably against the glass, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. No one noticed much when another man boarded the bus. A tall, silent figure named Vince Lee. Carrying a plastic bag and little else, he moved slowly down the aisle before sitting near the front. At first, nothing seemed unusual. He was quiet, expressionless, blending into the background of an otherwise uneventful journey. But within hours, this calm scene would shatter. The ordinary hum of the Greyhound was about to give way to screams of terror that would echo across Canada and around the world. To understand how a routine bus ride spiraled into one of the most horrifying crimes in Canadian history, we need to step inside that bus and see how the night unfolded. The Greyhound bus cut through the night along the Trans-Canada Highway, its interior dimly lit, filled with the low rustle of shifting seats and the occasional cough. Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly, a dark ocean of fields broken only by the yellow glow of passing road signs. Tim McLean, exhausted from a long day of work, had slipped into a deep sleep against the window, his headphones still playing faint music. He was young, full of life, and completely unaware of the danger sitting only a few rows away. Vince Lee, by contrast, seemed almost invisible to the other passengers. Dressed in a gray hoodie, he barely spoke a word. He carried no luggage, only a bag with a few belongings, and spent most of the ride staring silently ahead. To anyone watching, he was just another tired traveler heading west. But as the bus pressed deeper into the lonely night, something inside Lee began to shift. His behavior grew erratic, glances over his shoulder, muttering under his breath. Passengers noticed, but dismissed it as harmless. After all, who could have predicted what was about to happen? Moments later, with no warning, the silence of that bus would be shattered in the most brutal way imaginable. The bus rocked gently as it sped down the highway. Most passengers were half asleep, lulled by the rhythm of the road. Then, without warning, Vince Lee rose from his seat. Slowly, he walked down the aisle and stopped beside the sleeping Tim McLean. At first, no one paid attention. It looked like a man switching seats. But in an instant, the silence turned to horror. Lee pulled out a large hunting knife and, with terrifying speed, began stabbing McLean again and again. Screams erupted. Passengers jumped to their feet in disbelief, frozen by the violence unfolding just feet away. The driver slammed the brakes as chaos spread through the bus. Those closest scrambled down the aisle, pushing and tripping over each other in desperate attempts to escape. Outside, under the vast prairie night, shaken survivors watched in shock as the nightmare continued inside. Tim had no chance, and Lee showed no sign of stopping. As the passengers huddled in fear outside, helpless, the horror inside the locked bus was only beginning. The bus screeched to a halt on the shoulder of the highway, doors flung open as passengers poured into the night. Heartbeats raced, breathless voices shouted, and the cool prairie air was filled with panic. But inside the bus, Vince Lee remained, knife in hand, his expression disturbingly calm as he continued his attack. The driver quickly locked the doors, trapping Lee inside, but also sealing the horror within. Through the wide glass windows, the survivors could see everything. Shadows moving, Lee pacing the aisle, and the unimaginable violence continuing against Tim McLean's lifeless body. Some passengers broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. Others frantically called 911, their voices trembling as they tried to explain the unthinkable. A few even grabbed makeshift weapons, a hammer, a crowbar, desperate to help, but too terrified to go back inside. And so they stood there, powerless, forced to witness a nightmare unfold just meters away, knowing that nothing could stop it. By the time police arrived, the scene had already spiraled beyond comprehension, and the standoff with Vince Lee was only just beginning. When the first police cruisers arrived, flashing lights cut through the dark prairie. Officers ordered everyone back, keeping the shaken passengers at a distance as they surrounded the bus. But no one dared go inside. Behind the tinted windows, Vince Lee moved slowly, methodically, his silhouette carrying the glint of the knife. Negotiators tried shouting through megaphones, their voices carried across the empty highway. But Lee didn't respond. Instead, he paced the aisle, muttering to himself, pausing only to glance toward the terrified crowd outside. His calmness was more unsettling than rage. It was as if he were in another world, disconnected from reality. Hours dragged on. Police held their ground, unwilling to risk more lives. Passengers sat huddled on the roadside, some in shock, others praying. The air was thick with dread. Every minute that passed felt like an eternity. Inside that locked bus, a nightmare was frozen in time. And yet the question remained: how would it end? Eventually, as dawn threatened to break, the standoff reached its climax, and Vince Lee finally made his move. After nearly 5 hours of unbearable tension, the bus stood silent under the flashing police lights. Passengers huddled together on the roadside, waiting for an ending that felt impossible. Then, without warning, the door creaked open. Vince Lee stepped out, calm, expressionless, the same knife still in his hand. Officers shouted commands, weapons raised, the air electric with the threat of gunfire. But Lee didn't resist. Slowly, he dropped the blade, then sank to his knees as police swarmed and handcuffed him. For the survivors, it was a moment of fragile relief, but no sense of justice. The images of what they had witnessed were seared into their minds forever. But the arrest was only the beginning. The real shock would come later, in court when the verdict was announced and Canada would be forced to confront a question with no easy answer. Was this justice? Vince Lee's arrest sent shockwaves across Canada, but the real debate began in the courtroom. Diagnosed with schizophrenia, Lee was found not criminally responsible for his actions, a verdict that stunned the public. Families, survivors, and citizens struggled to understand how someone could commit such an atrocity and yet be released under psychiatric care. The case sparked nationwide conversations about mental health, criminal justice, and public safety. Was Lee a monster, or a man trapped in a mind he could not control? The survivors continued to carry the weight of that night, their trauma compounded by the world's outrage and disbelief. Even years later, discussions about Lee's eventual conditional release remain heated. For many, the story of the Greyhound Bus Beheading is not just a tale of horror. It's a haunting reminder of the blurred lines between illness, accountability, and justice. This tragic event didn't just end with a verdict. It left scars, questions, and lessons that linger in the minds of everyone who heard the story. The Greyhound Bus Beheading remains one of Canada's most shocking crimes. For the passengers, the memory of that night is forever burned into their minds. A moment when normal life turned into a nightmare in seconds. Beyond the horror, the case continues to spark debates about mental illness, public safety, and the limits of the justice system. Vince Lee's story forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. How do we protect society while treating those who are truly ill? And can true closure ever exist for the victims? For viewers, the story leaves more than shock. It leaves reflection. It's a chilling reminder that sometimes reality can be far darker than fiction. The Greyhound Bus Beheading remains one of the darkest crimes in Canadian history. A chilling reminder of how quickly the ordinary can turn into the unthinkable. If this story left you shaken, do not forget to subscribe to Crime Time with Mike for more true crime stories that uncover the cases the world can't forget.